now my talk, it just didn't even come to the surface until last night. And I had been thinking, well, so what's going to come? When Renee asked me the title of my talk, I thought, oh, well, what? Oh, and so out of the air, I picked the heart of a lotus flower. And then, of course, a few weeks, a month or so later, I thought, well, what on earth is that going to be about? Now I'll have to speak to that. But last night it began to make a bit more sense. And so what I'm going to share with you today is my journey, or some parts. I would be here for a very, very long time if I was sharing it all, but some parts of my journey. Because, and then I saw that the heart of the lotus flower was very relevant, because my mother-in-law once said to my late husband, we had had a few difficulties, my husband and I, and he was talking it over with his mother, as you do, and he said, her response anyway to what he was saying was, well, you know, you have to remember that Carol, she was sort of like, she's like a lotus flower. She came, you know, from the mud, and she didn't mean that, it wasn't a derogative statement, she just meant from a very difficult background. And but the lotus flower grows up and becomes this beautiful flower to the sun, you see. And so I thought, right, I'll speak about my journey. And also, in the little room where I am, there's the two beds, and there's a mirror one side and another mirror the other side. And I was by the other mirror and I looked at it, and this was last night, and it just said, just do you. And I thought, I'll take that. So I thought I'd like to put a little message to the person who wrote that, say thank you. Yeah. So, but I'm going to start with my birth, and this is how the limited understanding that I have has come about. It wasn't through books. I never read a book till I was 32 at all. We didn't have books in our house. I grew up in a house which is my father and brother, and there were no books, and so I was born into he was a coal miner. It was in a coal mining town, and you know, things were pretty tough. He was, you know, he was a drinker, and he wasn't home a lot, and so we had to really bring ourselves up, myself and my brother, and that's all right. He was managing in his way, and we loved him for that. But my mother left home when I was 3.5, and the pain of separation from my father was intense, and it was the first time that I really came to understand pain and grief, and he was grief-stricken. And so as a 3.5-year-old, there wasn't much I could do about it, but I remember standing by him with my head on his shoulder, and all I could do was love him, you know. But I understood the pain and grief that sometimes one has in life. And as I said, there were rather difficult times. And there was a lot of learning and growing, and I was the mother to my younger brother, who was a year younger than myself. And one time when I was feeling a little bit lost and a little bit lonely, I was in bed this night, and I woke up because there was someone standing at my bedside. And this was a lady, and she was looking down on me, and she was looking down with such love, such unbelievable love, that it went to my heart. And from that moment on, I knew that I was loved, and I had a centre, and I had something to go out from, and I was 10 at that time. So that was when I knew what love was at that point. I had never known love till that moment, and I knew that, you know, that's where I wanted to be. And in fact, she smiled at me, never said anything. She walked away around behind the door, and I was going wherever she was going, I was going to. So I was out of that bed, around that door, and she was by the wall, and she was just about to go through the wall. And she turned round to me and said, "Not yet." And I was terribly disappointed because I wanted to follow her. But that's when I felt love for the first time. And then when I was 15, I left school at 15, I had skipped a class at school, so you know, I was reasonably bright. But at 15, somebody came along and said, "I'm looking for somebody to manage a shop." This was a shop in a local village, and it was a shop that sold everything. And so he came and asked if I would like to manage his shop. And so at 15, I thought, well, if he asked me, I must be able to do that. And so off I went. I left school the next day, and I went into the shop, and it was, I really enjoyed it. And then and then my father had a little bit of a breakdown, and we went down we were in the Waikato then. We went down to the King Country. And whilst there, walking down the street one day, so I was only there because my father was not well, and I'd gone down there with him. But walking down the street one day, I bumped into a man who was walking the other way. We bumped into one another. We tried to get out of each other's way, and it didn't sort of seem to work. And he said to me, "I think we're stuck together. We should go out." And so we did. And we married. And we had 5 children. And it was interesting. And this is what I've learned about life's journey. It just sort of unfolds. It just happens, because a chap was coming in. I worked for a newspaper office then. And a chap came in and said to me, "I know the man that you're going to marry." And he happened to be painting my husband-to-be, his house. And he said, "I know the man you're going to marry." And he told my husband, "I know the girl you're going to marry." And he told me, "I know the boy that you're going to marry," but he didn't say who. You know, but we bumped into the street, and there we go, and we did. So all was known. I was to be there at that time and in that place. And from there I had 5 children. And then I learned what it was like to have a family. And the importance of family, because we were a close family and still are a close family. And so I learned about sharing and caring and being together, and all the things we learn from that. But one day when we always had a bath together. And one day, sitting in the bath, and he was doing his reading, and I never read, so I was just relaxing. And I sat up in the bath, and I just said, "I will." And as I said it, I thought, whoa, what am I doing here? And slithered back in the water. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I don't know." But something deep inside understood and knew what that was all about. And then I was in a time when expression was coming in. Express yourself, you know, different ways that you go about doing this. And so I thought, well, I'm not very good at expressing myself. I might take a pen and I'll take a piece of paper and I'll try and write down how I feel. That's a good start, you know. And so I did. So I got my pen and I got my paper and I was sitting very still. Eyes closed. And so, a word came, so I wrote it down. Didn't really know what it was, I just wrote it down. And another word and another word. And I thought, oh, that's all right. And then stopped, and then I thought, well, that's it. Express myself. But when I looked at it, it said, "You will be called upon to heal in 7 days' time. You will be called upon to heal with love in 7 days' time." And I thought, well, that's not really expressing myself very much. I didn't really know what that was about. So, I counted down the days. 1, 2, 3. We came to the 7th day, 10 minutes before midnight. I was in bed, and the phone rang. So my husband got out and answered the phone, and he said, "Oh, someone wants you on the phone." I thought, this hour of night? I'd forgotten all about the writing. And I got on the phone, and there's a young voice on the phone who said to me, "Mrs. C." It was somebody I knew. They called me Mrs. C. "Mrs. C, Carl," which was my son, "Carl is in trouble and you're the only person who can help him." So I said, "Right." He said, "Could you come now?" I said, "Yes." So I got off the phone. My husband said, "Well, we're going down to where he lived." Now Carl, when his grandmother died, he was so upset about it, he just couldn't really come to terms with it. He was really, really upset about it. He couldn't believe it. And he got into, well, not into trouble so much, but into the wrong company. And so there was a little bit of a separation time for us all. And he'd gone out quite young to live on his own, and I said, "Oh, well, that's all right, if that's what you need to do." So off he'd gone. And I didn't know how to bridge that gap. And so every night, when I went to bed, I would pray. And I'd say, "Please help us to bridge this gap." And so the phone call came. So I was on the way driving out there. I thought, well, what am I going to do? What can I do? This doesn't sound very good. And when I got out there, it wasn't very good neither. There were quite a few young people there, about 12, and they all were rather inebriated and a little bit of other stuff going on. And so I thought, well, and so when I went in, and he had been digging a hole, so he was all very dirty, digging a hole because his dog had died and he wanted to dig it up again. And so really what had been happening is he was going back to the time when his grandmother died. And so here we came, face to face. He was all just dirty and dishevelled and, you know. And all I could do was put my arms around him and say, and he said to me, "Oh, Mum, no, don't touch me, I'm very dirty, you know." I said, "That's all right." I said, "I love you. I love you." And everything melted away, you know. And I learned at that moment the power of love, what it can do, you know. It's not something you think about or you think, what can you do? It's something that is spontaneous and it's just done. And so in that moment, all that gap was healed, that sadness for him was gone. And so afterwards, I was thinking about that. I thought, well, was that all known? Was that writing, you know? It was so, it came to be. So there's something much bigger than us, much bigger than what I knew anyway, out there that was guiding the process and letting it unfold in its way. And then, not long after that, my husband was an avid reader. He read about everything, and he was a very, very avid reader. And he did a lot. He'd spent 9 years travelling around the world. He'd spent a lot of time hitchhiking in India and staying in the temples, and so he was well read and well travelled. And of course, I was just a coal miner's daughter. So I never read. He did all the reading. But he would read these books. And so one day, and I've told others here this story, one day I was a bit fanatical about trying to keep everything clean. And so I was dusting the table, a little table, and he'd been sitting there reading, and he left this book, and it was open, but down the other way. And so I thought, I wish he would put his books away when he read. I wish he wouldn't leave this jolly book around. So I picked it up, and I thought, what does he read anyway? You know? And then I looked at it, oh, it's a secret doctrine. Oh, I wonder what that is. So I opened it up, you know. Oh, and so I'm looking, and I thought, oh, good grief. I don't understand a word. Best I shut it up and put it away. But then, a couple of years later, I was doing exactly the same. I was polishing that same little table, and there was a book on it, and I went to put it away, and lo and behold, it was the same book. But it was open, and I picked it up at its open page, and I had a little read. And all of a sudden, it resonated. And what I read resonated. And I thought, I know that. That speaks to me. And when my husband came home from work, I said, gosh, that's a wonderful little book that you're reading there. And he said, have you been looking at it? I said, yes, I've been reading it. And I took a couple of pieces out of it, and I was trying to discuss it with him. And he said, I've got no idea what you're talking about. So, that was my introduction to Madame Blavatsky. Ah, dear. So, the journey continued. And one day, we had, I'm just taking little snippets of my journey and my learning. one day we had a young boy. I've got 4 boys and 1 girl, and the 4 boys are fairly close in age. I had 5 children under 4. Oh. The last 2 were twins, and possibly if I'd have had pain when you had babies, you know, I might not have had that many, but I never had any pain. No childbirth, no pain. They just slipped out. And they came out very quickly. And my husband I'd say, something feels a bit strange. He said, that's it, bag. You drop me off at the hospital, and off we'd go. And so I would walk on, and by the time I actually got into my little bed that was coming, and there'd be all this hustle and bustle and say, oh look, this baby's coming, and so the baby was born, and that was it. And so it was in there, done, and out again. It was a strange journey, even for the twins. And the twins, I didn't know I was having twins. I'd actually been to 3 doctors because I'd had my doctor was away, and so I had to go to another one. This is, you know, closer to the time of birth. And then there was another one, and they all said, oh, very strong heartbeat, very strong heartbeat. And then I got up to the hospital, and then they sort of said, have you been to the doctor lately? And I said, yes. They said, we better go and, you know, you'll have to have an x-ray in the morning. And I said, oh, right. And I thought to myself, well, I don't think I'm going to be here in the morning, but anyway, we'll go along with the plan. And about 15 minutes later, the twins were born, and so there was this one, and then, you know, I had that one, and then they said, oh, and there's another one, and I thought, another one? What am I going to do with another one? I didn't really know where to put it. And when I rang up my husband and told him, I said, are you coming up? He said, strike me pink. He said, you know. I said, are you coming up? He said, no, I think I'll come up in the morning. But he did come up because he was a loving, wonderful husband and father. And, but, so that was all a journey in itself too. But, so having 4 boys, getting back on track here, 4 boys, and the 4 boys all, they were very outdoorish. We had a farm. We didn't live on the farm, we lived in town. We went out to the farm every weekend, and we went out with a van full of children. You didn't have to wear seatbelts then, and they piled in from the neighbourhood, and we'd have about 14 in this little blue van that could hardly move, and they'd all go in, and we'd just shut the door like that because everybody wanted to come. And so it was, there was some wonderful days and a great lot of learning at the farm. And in those days on the farm, I was dagging sheep, and I was lifting hay, and I was fencing. So all these other little things were going on within this. But they had a motocross track on the farm, and so a lot of them would like to come out, and some of them had bikes and rode bikes, and our boys rode bikes. But one day they were out at the farm, and they'd gone but I didn't go. It was one of the very few times I never went to the farm when everybody else was there. And I was washing on the line. And suddenly I thought, I have to go in and sit down. And I didn't know why I was going in to sit down. I just felt like I needed to, so I did. And when I was sitting there, relaxing, the image of a young chap that I knew came to me. Actually, I could see him. And his name was David Spice. And I looked and I said, hello, David, without even thinking. I said, what are you doing, you know? And he said, I've come for some help. And I said, oh, well, what's wrong? He said, I've passed on, I've gone, or something. He said, and would you give a message to my mother? And I said, yes, well, what's the message? I mean, I never had this happen to me in my life, but you know, in those moments, you're just going along. It's only afterwards that you step aside and say, well, that was strange. But in the moment, you're in that moment. And he gave me this message, and he said, my mother will ring you, and you can pass on the message. I said, okay. So the next thing, about, I don't know, a few hours later, there was a noise coming up the stairs of all the children, and they come bursting into the room, and they said, Mum, the most terrible thing happened. There was an accident on the farm, and David Spice just jumped on the spike. He wasn't supposed to. In fact, they were all going home. It was the last bike left, and he just jumped on it, and he went straight over the cliff, you know, just like that. And I said, oh, that's terrible. I didn't say, well, actually, I think I knew that something wasn't right. But, you know, I said, that's terrible. And they said, yes. And in fact, my sons, and one of them in particular, held him when he died. And we talked about it later, and I said, so are you all right? He said, yes. He said, I didn't know what to do, Mum. He was 14. You know? He said, I didn't know what to do, Mum. But he said, I just said to him, you'll be all right. And he said, I love you. And he said, well, I didn't really know what else to say. And I said, well, and he said, I held him. And I said, well, that's all what else can you do, you know? And so his mother, so I was telling my husband about this experience that I'd had. And he said, are you going to ring and tell them? I said, no. I was told that they would ring, you know, and they would ask. He said, well, how are they going to ring and ask if they actually don't know? I said, I don't know, but that's what I was told, and that's what I will follow. And so on the day of his funeral, they had him at the house, and the day of that funeral, the night before his funeral, his mother, I got a ring. I said, would you like to come, and the family, would you like to come up and see David? He's at home. Would you like to come up and see him before this service, before they close the coffin? And, you know, and I said, yes, we will, you know. So up we went, and on the way up, my husband said to me, so are you going to tell them now? And I said, no, not unless they ask me. And he said, well, how can they ask you? You know, they don't know to ask you. I said, well, at 9 o'clock we're coming home. And so it got to 10 to 9, and I said to my husband, it's time for us all to go home. He said, oh no, you haven't passed on the message. I said, well, it's time to go home. And we got up from the couch, and I was walking out to the door, and halfway across the room, this mother came out from the passage, straight and directly to me, and she looked at me and she said, have you got something to tell me? Oh. And I said, yes, I have. So we went into the room, and I passed on the message. And she said, thank you. She said, thank you. I feel at peace now, thank you. And so how did she know to do that? And how did I know that she was going to? But we don't always have to know. We just have to do. And that was the time of doing. Oh, I'm well over my time. I'm so sorry. But I would like to share with you a time when it came to the passing of my husband. And the night before, because I want to speak of conscious dying, the night before, he was doing the dishes, and he had his back to me, and he said, because he liked to help, you know, and he was 9 years older than me, and he said, I can't help you anymore, is what he said. And I thought, that's a strange thing to say. What's he talking about, you know? He came and sat down, and we'd had all the family there, the family from Australia, everybody had come home. It was just after school holidays. And so all the children had come home, all the grandchildren were all there for 2 weeks. And this was the night that everybody had left, and he'd said goodbye to everybody. And so he came and sat down on the couch, and he said, we'd been listening to music. We'd sat a day and we were listening to music, and that's when I saw the value of music. We were listening to classical music, just him and I, sitting under the tree, just listening, you know. And he said to me, thank you for the music, and thank you for everything. And I thought, oh, he's feeling a little bit, you know. I said, you're welcome. And the next morning, I woke up and I was going to work. And I said goodbye. I said, see you, you know. And he said, yes. I said, are you feeling okay? He said, yes, of course I am. Off you go, you know, off you go. And I said, okay. But when I went to work, I was only there for 2 hours, and then all of a sudden I said, sorry, I've got to go home. I've just got to go home. They said, is there a problem? I said, no, I don't know. I just got to go home, that's all. You know, just need to be home. But when I got home, he just passed away. He wanted to do it by himself, and he always spoke about that too. But he was sitting in the Lotus position, in the place that he always sat, with the TV lightly on and the fire going. It was in the middle of winter. And he just passed away in that position, as he'd always done. And he knew he was going. He knew he was going. So I was able to witness a conscious death. And because when you pass away at home, they have the police have to come. And when they came, they said to one another, they didn't think that I noticed and heard, they said, is he dead? You know? The other one said, I think so. And when the grandchildren came in and saw him, they said, he's only kidding. Look, he's going to go boom soon, because he's not dead. Look at him. He's sitting there in his chair like he always did. But what that left them with was, and what they have discussed since, is that, well, you just go to sleep. Yes, you know, there's no fuss. You just do what you've always been doing, and you go to sleep. The lotus flower, just to round this up. I was sitting on a little hill, looking at a lovely pond, and looking at a lotus flower, and I thought, wow. And it gave me such a lot of joy, you know, and I was sitting there looking at it, and all of a sudden I thought, gosh, it started in the mud, you know. It came up with a spindly little root, shoot, and buffeted about by the wind and the rain and, you know, through the muddy water. But it knew where it was going. It was just attracted to the sun. It didn't have to think about it or do anything. It just grew to the light, to the sun, and then expressed the joy in the journey. And I realised then that, oh, my name is Carol, and Carol is Song of Joy. So I saw my journey in that lotus flower, and saw the thread of my journey in life, and thought, yes, I am loved. That's all we have to know. And what else is there? And let life unfold, and just live and move and have our being in the very knowledge and the knowing of that. I would just like to really just finish my little piece. It's just this little piece. From At the Feet of the Master, because I picked up this little book. Waiting the word of the Master, watching the hidden light, listening to catch his orders, in the very midst of the fight, seeing his slightest signal across the heads of the throng, hearing his faintest whisper above earth's loudest song. Thank you very much.